The following presentation is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Rick Charles presents Tales from the Other Side, Soulmates. "The property's yours, Mr. Wade," the real estate agent had said as she handed Milo the keys. "Enjoy your new home." He remembered those words as he advanced up the creaking stairs to the front porch. Long, curly red hair swayed underneath his fedora. He held the house key in one hand and a cheap coffee in the other. Despite it being 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Milo was preparing himself for a long night of settling into his new home. Now standing on the front porch, he gulped down the last bit of lukewarm coffee and tossed the empty cup aside. The porch was occupied by old wooden furniture that accented the equally rustic facade of the old log cabin. Cobwebs rimmed the edges of the clouded windows, and the front door stood guard against the elements which through the years had faded its paint. Extra hinges suggested that a screen door had once been in place. Milo took mental note that he'd have to get around to replacing it. Evidently, it was just one of the many projects that would have to be done around this place. But given the price he had paid for it, the cabin's derelictness was not surprising. Milo sighed. He fiddled the keys into the lock, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned from years of disuse. The motion disturbed flecks of dust that fluttered onto his vest. He lightly brushed them off. Light from the doorway crept into the living room. Milo stepped inside and took a deep breath. The musty smell was something he hoped a few scented candles would fix. The whole cottage, coming fully furnished, was a bonus. All Milo had been looking for was a small cabin in the middle of the woods. This place had 3 floors, including the attic, and, albeit old, worn furniture in almost every room. A place like this would have normally been above his price range, but he remembered the real estate agent mentioning something about how it had been owned by an elderly man or woman who passed away with no will or any known relatives. The whole property and everything on it got put up for sale and remained vacant for years until today. Milo walked over to the living room couch and sat down. A coffee table, a fireplace, a chair in the corner, and a few decorations on the walls were the only other accompaniments. It had been a long day and all he wanted to do was relax, but he also wanted to get unpacked so he wouldn't have to worry about it tomorrow. Milo attempted to rub the tiredness off his face before getting back up and returning to his truck. The second he stepped outside, goosebumps erupted all over his body. He didn't know why, but he felt dread. It was like just after waking up from a nightmare, the hesitation to move or take a breath. Milo stood absolutely quiet, coyly glancing to either side of himself. He felt like he wasn't alone, but he didn't know why. There was nobody around. The nearest town was at least a half-hour drive away, and he hadn't heard any other cars pass by on the dirt road, so it seemed quite unlikely that someone could be watching him out here, yet that's exactly what he felt. The cell phone in his pocket began to ring, startling Milo out of his hesitation. He quickly pulled it out and checked the caller ID. It was an unknown number. Typical. He let the call go to voicemail. After the call ended, Milo wrinkled his forehead. His phone had 0 bars, no service. An icon appeared displaying one new voicemail. "What?" the man muttered in bewilderment. Milo tapped the screen, drew the phone up to his ear, and listened. The voicemail was silenced for a few seconds, but then the intervention of static caused him to wince and briefly pull the phone away from his ears. He continued listening, and after a few more seconds, the static ceased and the voicemail ended. As soon as it did, Milo immediately felt the feeling began to dissipate, as though a warm breeze blew across his body. Only then did he realize his heart was pounding and his palms were sweating. As his heart rate slowed, he took a deep breath and shook it off. That evening, as the sun dropped below the swaying pine and aspen trees surrounding the property, Milo sat on his couch, shuffling through a cardboard box between his legs on the floor. The soft glow from a lamp in one corner of the room was gradually becoming his only source of light. Using his elbows to keep the cardboard flaps out of the way, he carefully removed various items from the box and set them on the coffee table by his steaming mug of coffee. Miscellaneous office supplies was scribbled in permanent marker onto one of the flaps, and it was just that. Stacks of sticky notes, random pens, and a stapler, among other items, cluttered both the box and the coffee table as Milo sorted through them. As he neared the bottom of the box, he paused. Laying face down beneath all of the office supplies was a rustic picture frame. Milo gritted his teeth. He shuffled the rest of the items aside, retrieved the frame, and turned it over. He held his breath. The image of the young man and woman tightly embracing each other in front of their first home together caused tears to swell in his eyes. Though only taken a year ago, he hardly recognized himself in the photo. His clean haircut had since declined into a waterfall of wavy red curls down his neck, and his goatee had grown into a scruffy beard. Even his kept-up younger self, though, did not approach the elegance of the woman with whom he shared an embrace. Katrina Wade was everything a man could ask for, but her sharp green eyes, silky blonde hair, and supermodel body were only the half of it. They met each other's needs, understood each other's obsessions, and felt each other's burdens. She was the woman a man only meets once in his life, a soulmate, if there is such a thing. The incident was still so fresh in Milo's mind. He remembered every detail from that moment. The way his receptionist raised her eyebrows when she said the call was for him. The random fingerprint smears on his laptop screen. The wastebasket set in a different spot than it usually was. His alert senses had freeze-framed everything. "Your wife has been in a car accident," the sheriff had said. "She was pronounced dead in the ambulance." Milo's face reddened at the thought of the man who'd fallen asleep at the wheel and drifted into oncoming traffic. His vision suddenly went hazy and he jumped up from the couch, kicked the coffee table over, and screamed until his face was pale. The office supplies on the coffee table scattered across the floor, and his mug of coffee showered the stacks of cardboard boxes around him. Milo stood for a moment, clenching his fists. He felt lightheaded. The last bit of orange sun rays were fading from the cabin windows, and the nighttime ambience of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl had already begun. It soothed Milo. He let the picture frame slip out of his hand and drop to the floor, its landing cushion by the rug underfoot now stained with coffee. He wiped the tears off his face, slouched back down onto the couch, and closed his eyes. As Milo faded into unconsciousness, a sudden shift in lighting caught his attention. He flashed his eyes open and jolted upright. There was only darkness. He couldn't see anything, but he could definitely feel something. He could feel his hair standing on end, and his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his hands clamming, his forehead sweating, and his eyes twitching. He could feel something watching him from somewhere in the darkness. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something was. When he tried to breathe, he only shuddered. After a moment of trembling where he sat, Milo's eyes finally started adjusting to the darkness. He began to make out the overturned coffee table, the stacks of cardboard boxes around him, and the decorations and windows on the walls. His eyes fixed themselves on the floor lamp in the corner of the room, which he wrinkled his eyebrows at the sight of. He could have sworn he'd left that lamp on when he'd fallen asleep. Had there been a power outage? Once Milo's vision was clear enough, he took 3 deep breaths and mustered the courage to move. He quickly leaped off the couch, stumbled over to the floor lamp, and fiddled with the knob until the bulb finally sparked. Light again flooded the log cabin's dank living room, and with it, the feeling of dread instantly dissipated. Milo wiped his sweaty palms off on his jeans. He peered out a nearby window into the dark night. He didn't remember falling asleep all the way, but he must have, because it was well after sunset now. Milo put a hand against his chest and sighed as he felt his heart rate slowing down. After calming down for a moment, Milo returned to face his ransacked living room. He had a lot of unpacking to do yet, and now some cleaning up to do too. For that, he was going to need some more coffee. With another sigh, Milo stepped over his mess and made his way to the kitchen. Once he was clear of the cardboard boxes and office supplies cluttering the living room floor, he looked up. Milo stopped in his tracks. Outside the window, above the kitchen sink, 2 green lights gleamed in at him. The lamp he'd just turned back on began to flicker behind him. That now familiar feeling of dread began to swell within him once again, as his brain immediately sifted through all the possibilities of what he was looking at. Fireflies? Headlights? A hallucination? Milo blinked and rubbed his eyes. The lights were still there. At that moment, the 2 lights blinked simultaneously. Milo's face paled. They were not lights, they were eyes. The second he came to that realization, the 2 eyes shifted to the right and disappeared. A beam of moonlight flickered through the window as whatever had been blocking it moved out of the way. Milo's lower jaw began to quiver. Tears swelled in his bloodshot eyes. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. He was not alone. The next few days were without incident. After that first night, Milo had instinctively developed a pretty strict routine of not stepping outside after sunset. For good measure, he always kept all the cabin doors and windows locked as well. He also didn't dare to venture into the surrounding woodland at any time of the day. Instead of exploring the woods around his property, Milo scoured every corner of his home for some semblance of a weapon left behind by the previous owner. In the stuffy, cobweb-ridden basement, he had dusted off an old axe and rusted double-barrel shotgun. If there was a box of shotgun shells laying around, it wasn't anywhere in sight. Milo brought both items up anyway, leaned the axe by the front door, and left the shotgun on the kitchen table to fix it up sometime. After about a week, Milo was running out of food. He'd packed a box of non-perishables when he'd moved, but he was almost through his supply. The nearest town was a good half-hour's drive and only offered a small convenience store. The weary man was reluctant to drive all the way into town and have to interact with other people just to buy some food, but it would be nice to get away from this creepy backwoods cabin for a little while. It was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon when Milo finally decided to head out. He slipped on his shoes, grabbed his keys, and made for his truck. An overcast sky dimmed the landscape surrounding his cabin. After keeping himself locked inside for a few days, the afternoon breeze felt good on his skin. Milo sauntered over to his truck, grabbed the door handle, and attempted to open the car door. It wouldn't budge. The man frowned. He didn't remember locking the doors. With a sigh, he inserted the key, pulled the door open, and slid into the driver's seat. However, after inserting the key into the ignition slot, nothing happened. Milo cursed under his breath and kept trying. Finally, he threw his hands up and furiously hurled the car keys into the passenger seat. They bounced off the cushion and clattered onto the floor. The truck's battery was definitely dead. Milo didn't want to accept it, but he finally relented. He couldn't even make a quick trip into town to grab food. He began to run through everything in his mind. Had he left a light on in the truck? Was the battery just getting old? He was always so careful, especially with his truck. It's like something didn't want him to leave. Milo paused. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he began to feel a tingling on the back of his neck. He could feel his hair standing on end again. A chill overcame him. He examined his own arms in dismay. It was happening again, but more terrifying than the feeling itself was the uncertainty as to what was causing it. The frightened man threw open his car door and jumped out onto the gravel underfoot. As he started back towards his front porch, he caught sight of something in his peripheral vision and turned to face the tree line at the edge of the lawn. 4 long black poles stuck up out of the undergrowth and stretched up into the trees. Whatever they were supporting was hidden within the branches of the swaying conifers. The poles were slightly bent, less than halfway up, almost like limb joints. Milo's eyes widened. Once he realized what he was looking at, he started making out the rest of the thing's silhouette through the pines. He could see some semblance of a torso, a pair of smaller limbs that he had initially mistaken for dead tree branches, and the eyes, those 2 glowing green eyes. Even in the daylight, they faintly shimmered. They peered through the tree line, almost higher than the cabin's 2-story windows. Whatever that thing was, it was at least as tall as a telephone pole. The man closed his eyes and shook his head. He realized he'd been in somewhat of a trance looking at the tall, misshapen entity hiding just out of sight. When he opened his eyes again, he was taken aback at the sight of nothing. The 4 scraggly legs were gone. The glowing green eyes were gone. Milo actually took a step forward, trying to spot it again. It was gone, just as quickly and mysteriously as it had appeared. Milo bolted into a dead run up the stairs, straight across the porch and through the front door, where he locked it shut behind him and grabbed the axe. He quietly backed up to the couch and sat down, keeping his eyes peeled on the windows and door. He kept a tight grip on the axe. He remembered his cell phone. Who should he call? There was a giant thing lurking in the forest around his cabin. Would the police even believe him? Milo shook his head. Nobody would believe him. He didn't even believe himself. Get it together, man, he scolded himself as he rubbed his aching forehead. You're losing your fucking mind. Milo refused to budge. He was too paranoid of every corner and dark space in his house to feel comfortable meandering about it. Even though the apparent threat resided in the woods beyond his cabin, his senses were alert and wary of even the faintest shadow. As nightfall approached, however, and the shadows around him grew more encompassing, Milo realized he was going to have to get up in order to turn some lights on and keep the darkness at bay. He kept a firm grip on the axe in one hand as he went from room to room, flipping the light switches. When he reached his bedroom on the upstairs floor, he turned the light on, sat on his bed, and finally set the axe down. He looked over at his nightstand where his cell phone rested, charging. Milo sighed as he pondered who to call. Even if he wouldn't be able to get the authorities involved, he could only interpret the empty feeling within him as an urge for any kind of company. His romantic ideal of spending some time by himself in the countryside had been thoroughly shattered by the ominous presence lurking around his property, and he didn't want to be alone out here any longer. Milo reached over and plucked his phone off the nightstand. He tapped the home button, entered his passcode, and pleaded for there to be at least a bar or two of service. He frowned when he saw that there still wasn't. With a sigh, he tossed it across the bed. As he did, the phone inexplicably began to jingle. As it did, the bedroom lights briefly flickered. Milo's neck hairs stood up again. That now familiar sense of dread resurfaced, seemingly summoned by the ringing phone. He reluctantly reached over to grab it, tapped the answer button, and drew it to his ear. "Hello?" he asked nervously. "Hey, Milo," a feminine voice answered on the other end of the line. "Becca," Milo retorted in surprise. "Who else?" the woman laughed. "I've been trying to get a hold of you." "I don't have any service out here," he explained. Milo paused, realizing the irony of his statement, considering he'd somehow just received a call. He wondered if his cousin, Rebecca Mallory, had picked up on the irony as well. He waited for her response. "Well, I'm glad I finally got through to you," Rebecca broke the silence. "How have you been?" Milo shrugged, as if she could see his body language. "I've been all right." "How's the new place?" she pressed. Milo looked around his bedroom as though seeking a redeeming quality in light of recent events. "It's spacious," he finally answered. "The previous owner left everything. I haven't even been through it all yet. The basement is full of stuff in storage." "What a steal," Rebecca exclaimed. "I bet there's something valuable hidden down there." "I found an old shotgun," Milo continued. "It's not in very good shape, but I'm going to see if I can fix it up." "It might be worth something," Rebecca suggested. She quietly anticipated Milo's response, but he was too hazy with paranoia and weariness to maintain a light conversation. Thus, silence quickly returned. "So, how are you doing out there, really?" Rebecca finally said. Milo sighed. "Honestly, it's pretty lonely out here." Quite to the contrary, of course, Milo didn't feel alone at all. That was just the problem. But he didn't know how to convey it to his cousin without sounding crazy. "Well, you know what I was thinking," Rebecca said. "I have a long weekend coming up, and I thought it'd be fun to come visit you and catch up. I'll bring wine or something." "Bring some food," Milo replied with more urgency in his voice than he'd intended. He could almost feel Rebecca's hesitancy on the other end of the line, as though she was alarmed by his hasty response. "You know, hot dogs or something," Milo said almost too nonchalantly. "We can make a fire pit out back and cook up some hot dogs or s'mores." "Yeah," Rebecca replied. "That sounds nice. Maybe some beer to go along with it? Sounds like a beer kind of night." "I'll be looking forward to it," Milo said. "Oh, and hey, I think I left a light on or something in my truck because the battery's dead. If you could, be sure to bring a set of jumper cables. I'm stranded out here for the time being." "Sure," Rebecca agreed. "Is that why you want me to bring you food so bad? You're stuck out there and can't go grocery shopping, can you?" She laughed, but Milo was far from amused. Rebecca quickly registered his silence and took the hint that he wasn't in a playful mood. Okay, she relented. I'll bring some food and jumper cables. It'll be nice to get out of the city for a bit. It's been a while since I've gone camping. See you this weekend then? Yeah, Milo replied. And hey, are you sure you're doing all right? Rebecca insisted. I know you've been through a lot, but I can't help but feel like something's wrong. You sound, worried about something. Yeah, I'm fine, Milo brushed off. Like I said, it's just pretty lonely out here. I suppose the remoteness is just getting to me. I'm sure I'll get used to it. He looked over at one of the windows in his bedroom, almost expecting to see those eerie green eyes staring at him again. Thankfully, there was only darkness. All right, Rebecca said. Have a good night. See you this weekend. You too, Milo replied. As the call ended, he pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at the screen. It still displayed 0 service bars. Milo shook his head in bewilderment. He reached over, set the phone back on the nightstand, and laid down on top of the bed. He already knew he wasn't getting any sleep tonight, but it felt nice to at least try relaxing. The phone call had invigorated him with hope. He didn't want to be alone out here with that giant, scraggly thing lurking just out of sight, and soon he wouldn't have to be. He thought about explaining everything to Rebecca when she got here in the hopes that she'd understand, and maybe invite him to live under her roof for a while. If not, then at least after they got his truck running again, he'd be able to pack up and find a cheap hotel to stay at while he figured things out. It's not that the cabin wasn't nice and that the woods wasn't a pleasant change of scenery, but nobody had warned him the property came with a monster. On the day Rebecca was scheduled to arrive, Milo had been anxiously watching the road from his rocking chair on the porch. The axe was an arm's reach away. Late in the afternoon, her car finally rumbled into the driveway. Though Milo waved in her direction, his eyes were fixed on the tree line beyond. Rebecca called to him as she got out of her car and grabbed some items from the back seat. With a bag of groceries in one hand and a 6-pack in the other, her wavy strawberry blonde hair bobbed as she hustled up to the porch. Her freckled face glowed with a wide smile. Milo met her at the top of the steps, and they managed a hug despite the groceries. Here, Milo said, I can take those off your hands. He grabbed the beer, and his cousin laughed. There's more for you in the car yet, Rebecca said. Groceries, that is. Milo led her inside to the kitchen and waved a hand in the air. I don't care where you set everything, he said. I've got more kitchen than I know what to do with. Rebecca placed her bag of groceries on the table where the shotgun still rested. Still working on this thing? She asked. Milo shrugged. I need to buy new parts for it, but obviously with my truck dead I haven't been able to do that. You didn't forget the jumper cables, right? No, sir, Rebecca beamed. We'll get your truck jumped for you in the morning. In the meantime, I'm starving. She pulled out a bag of hot dog buns and tossed them to Milo. You said you got a fire pit out back? Milo glanced out the kitchen window. It's gonna start getting dark soon, he said. Never roasted marshmallows under the stars, Rebecca giggled. Milo started. There's been He thought carefully about what to say next. Bear, Milo lied. Bear getting into my trash since I got here. I don't want it smelling our food and getting brave under the cover of darkness. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Are you sure it isn't a raccoon? I saw it, Milo insisted. Big ol' black bear. All right, Rebecca replied. I guess we'll just have to use your fireplace then. A few hot dogs and even more beers in, Milo and Rebecca filled the living room with good conversation and laughter as the fireplace enveloped them with light and warmth. With a limited supply of firewood inside, and Milo's strong-willed refusal to step outside after dark, pieces of a wooden chair he had found in the basement kept the hungry flames ablaze. "You don't think some of the furniture in here could be worth something?" Rebecca asked. Milo shrugged. "It doesn't matter to me since I got it all free." Rebecca shrugged back. "What was that?" Milo retorted. "This?" Rebecca shrugged again. "You shrug a lot." "It's my body sighing," Milo said with another shrug, suddenly realizing that he did in fact shrug a lot. "See?" Rebecca teased. In a flash, Milo thought he saw his wife's smile in Rebecca's. His eyes glazed over for only a second, but his cousin definitely noticed. "I'm sorry, did I say something wrong?" she asked. No, Milo shook his head. "Not you." Rebecca nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. "So, seen any other wildlife around here aside from that bear?" Milo inwardly sighed relief when she changed the subject before letting more awkward silence take hold. "Not really," Milo replied. "I hear owls at night, but it seems like, the bear must keep everything else away. You know, the smell of a predator and all that." "I know that feeling," Rebecca said. "I used to do a lot of hiking with my ex. Camping's more my thing, but he liked to hike. Anyway, it was in the spring, so there were birds singing all around us. We got to a spot in the trail that crossed a river, but just as we approached it, the whole forest suddenly went quiet. It was like someone flipped a switch. I remember it like it was yesterday. My ex gasped and pointed across the river. When I looked, standing on the other side, staring back at us, was this giant black wolf." Milo held his breath at the description of it, as, unbeknownst to Rebecca, it hit very close to home. She continued, "In that moment, the wolf felt more like a force of nature than an animal, the way it silenced the forest around it. Thankfully, it eventually turned and walked away, and honestly, so did we. We were so shaken up by it that we did not finish the hike." "A force of nature," Milo repeated under his breath. Milo fell so deep into contemplation that he began to let the awkward silence try creeping in again. "So Milo," Rebecca came to the rescue again. "Do you want to talk about it?" "It?" Milo retorted. "Her," Rebecca clarified. "Katrina." Milo drew in a deep breath. The alcohol had at least dulled the sting of hearing her name. "She was the one," he finally said. "My soulmate, if there ever was one." "Do you believe in soulmates?" Rebecca asked. Milo almost shrugged, but remembered her giving him shit for it, so he just sat there. "I'm no scientist, but I don't even know what a soul is, let alone a soulmate." The living room lamp flickered, catching their attention. "It's been doing that," Milo said. "It might need a new bulb." The sudden blare of a car alarm outside caused both of them to jump to their feet. Outside the windows, one of their vehicle's hazard lights repeatedly illuminated the front of the cabin. "What the fuck?" Rebecca exclaimed. "Stay here," Milo yelled, rushing to the front door and grabbing the axe. "Is it the bear?" Rebecca screamed. "We might have accidentally left some food in the car." Milo stormed out onto the porch. "Becca, it's your car." Rebecca rushed to the kitchen where she'd set her keys on the table and pressed the panic button. Outside, her car's alarm immediately ceased, and darkness flooded back into the driveway. The silence that followed was hair-raising. Rebecca crept out onto the porch beside Milo. "See anything?" she asked. "Get back inside," Milo replied. There was a tremble in his voice. It was enough for Rebecca to retreat back into the cabin without question. After a moment, Milo slightly lowered his axe and followed suit. Should we check the car for damage? Rebecca asked as Milo bolted the door shut. Tomorrow, he flatly stated. I wasn't kidding about that bear. It's very persistent. There's a reason I haven't been going outside after dark. The next morning, Milo and Rebecca sat in their pajamas at the kitchen table with coffees in hand. They could tell from the bags under each other's eyes that neither of them had slept well. I don't know if I can stay here, Milo said. That bear has been harassing me ever since I moved in. Rebecca grunted. If there's any marks on my car, I'm gonna fix the shotgun and go kill it myself. Did you actually see it last night? Milo shook his head. No, it stayed out of view. Maybe it was trying to get in the trunk. We'll have to check it for food. And you're sure it's a bear? Rebecca asked. Milo hesitated. I've said I've seen it, haven't I? That, Rebecca hissed. Right there. What? Milo frowned. You hesitated, she accused. Every time I ask you about the bear, you hesitate. No, I don't. Yes, you do. They glared at each other. There's something you're not telling me, Rebecca finally said. Is it or is it not a bear? Milo held his breath and didn't say anything. Rebecca huffed and stood up. Fine, she said as she walked to the front door. Let's go see what it did to my car and see if we can find tracks. Milo jumped up. Wait. Rebecca looked back at him even as she reached for the doorknob. It's not a bear, he admitted. She raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? I don't know, Milo said. Is it a wolf? Rebecca asked. A cougar? A really angry moose? It's not a wolf, Milo insisted. It's like nothing I've seen before. A smirk creased Rebecca's cheeks. What is it then, a Bigfoot or something? She stepped out onto the front porch, jogged down the stairs, and walked over to her car. Milo grabbed the axe again and hustled out after her. It's tall, he called to her as she examined her car. What, like a giraffe? Rebecca teased. No, not like a giraffe, Milo huffed. Well, Rebecca called back, my car's fine. I don't see any scratch marks. Maybe it was just an electronic malfunction? The sound of a branch snapping caught their attention, and they looked to the woods as a towering black blur rushed out from behind the trees. It galloped forward on 4 telephone pole-sized limbs with 2 smaller arms outstretched underneath. A series of tall spines quivered on its back, a clump of wriggling tentacles dangled from its small round head, and its emerald eyes left a ghostly green trail as they burned. The thing roared with the sound of fingernails against chalkboard, stinging their ears. Rebecca screamed and turned to run, but in an instant the monster had her in its branchy arms. As it halted, one of the legs punched down through Rebecca's car and imploded it with a tremendous crash. Debris flew across the lawn. As the thing lifted Rebecca to its face, Milo charged it with his axe. With a holler, he attempted to hack into one of its legs, but the axe sailed straight through to collide with the earth beneath their feet. He stumbled back and fell to the ground. Holding Rebecca eye to eye with itself, the monster extended its tentacles to grasp her face. They pulsed an electric blue as they began to draw energy from her body. Her screams descended into low moans as her body went limp. The thing was not consuming her flesh, it was absorbing something else inside of her. In the next instant, it dropped Rebecca's lifeless body 2 stories down to where she hit the ground with a horrid splat. Milo stared as the thing briefly made eye contact with him. He knew he was next. But instead of bending down to grab him too, though, after a moment it simply turned back toward the forest. Its visage became blurry, and as it re-entered the tree line, it seemed to vanish altogether. Milo's phone began to ring in his pocket. He jolted, fumbled it out, and looked at the screen. 0 service bars. Unknown caller. The man tapped to answer and drew the phone to his ear. "Hello?" he trembled. From the other end of the line came a deep, raspy imitation of human speech, enshrouded in static.